Go.
What to do, what to do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. Lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For the original episodes, the OGs, please visit brothersonbooks.com. Also, now we've partnered with Ensha Matcha. So for all you Ensha-loving book reading fanatics, when you use the promo code in the show notes, you will get 20% off. And I am Alex Allwild, and with me, as always, is my brother Jack Allwild. Jack, how you doing?
Doing great, Al. How's it going there?
No, it's been all right. I've had sort of tired, I guess. Had a couple of bad results in some of my recent competition, which has gotten me sort of down. But other than that, I'm just hanging in there. Got
You
only
got
about
you got the national tournament coming up in a couple weeks, right?
That's correct. I also only have I was just going through my amount of weeks left of work for the new year versus amount of weeks off. And that ratio is looking pretty decent. So I guess I'm sitting pretty there.
Life of a chemist.
Yeah. Well,
Cool.
unlike you, when you could work from home, I have to, I can't vacation in Myrtle while I'm still working. So it's a little different, I guess.
So what book are we reading today, Al?
We are reading one of your picks, a book called Chaos Kings. I now realize that I have the sleeve off, but it's just a red undersleeve, but it's by Scott Patterson. And I guess, Jack, you picked this, so you want to talk about how you picked this?
Sure. So we've read a couple of Taleb's books, and so Scott Patterson has been a reporter for more than 2 decades, mostly at the Wall Street Journal in New York City, DC, and London. His 20-time New York Times bestseller, The Quants, was about the rise of mathematical traders and their near destruction of the financial system. His second book, Dark Pools, which exposed how high-frequency trading had rigged the stock market, was lauded by a pantheon of financial writers. A winner of the, I think it's a Loeb Breaking News Award, Patterson has made frequent appearances in the media, including on CNBC, The Daily Show, and Fresh Air. He lives in Alexandria, Virginia, with his wife and son. But I heard Scott Patterson interviewed, I believe it was on the Investors Podcast with Clay Fink, and I've liked reading Taleb's works, particularly Black Swan and Skin in the Game. I don't think I've read Fooled by Randomness yet, but I know he talked about that a lot in this book. I mean, he talked about all of his books, but yeah, just I like kind of their message and kind of to prepare for the unexpected. And yeah, I thought this would be a good overview of what they were doing and how they went about
it. Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed. Well, I don't know. I enjoyed it. Relatively, I would say, easy read, decent length. I think it was close to about 300 pages. The back third, I struggled with a little bit, but the beginning parts I liked. He gave a lot of. I don't know if you watched any of his YouTube interviews off this book. He has they're probably 4 or 5 interviews. I mean, probably more than that, but I listened to about 4 or 5 interviews that he had with and without Taleb, which was pretty interesting to listen to him talk together. Because I don't know what your opinion was, but I felt like the book was more or less. I mean, he threw some other players in there, but it more or less was like a case study of both Taleb and then Spitznagel, like almost their lives. At least, yeah.
So I guess I didn't realize Spitznagel really seemed to cultivate the system, and he was the operator. It didn't sound like Taleb was really pushing the buttons, or it wasn't really his system to begin with. And it sounded like it really affected his health, because basically their strategy is they're running a fund that's bleeding money month after month. And then when, quote unquote, black swan comes around, they profit heavily. And then when you average it out over time, take like a geometric average, like you get like a pretty high return. But for Taleb's health, I guess he had to bow out. And I guess I didn't really know some of that thing. It seemed like they really used Taleb as a marketing tool to do these speeches and raise money for the fund, where Spitznagel would then, operate the fund. So definitely some cool things behind how they actually did it. I don't know. Are you going to try to implement any of this like type of insurance type of options, or?
I mean, so I guess just my general view was, so from a historic standpoint, they would say, like, if you go read like Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, he says like when you're young, you should be buying like 40% of the stock market, or sorry, 60% of the stock market and 40% of the bonds. That's more or less correct. And then obviously that ratio changes. But I was getting, so I guess maybe you could give some clarification if you understood this, but I felt like Taleb, or what Scott was saying, was that in the Universa fund, you would essentially take like a yearly 3% loss for these like quote unquote insurance premiums, which I guess they use as buying out of the money puts. Is that the correct terminology?
So they are buying out of the money puts, but they're also selling closer to the money puts to offset the cost. So it'd be like, so if the stock market's at like 100, and if I think it was a 20% decline in a month, I want to say. So it would be like buying for every, so like they might buy $100 put and then sell 2 of the 90s. So then if it hit the $80 mark, then it would start going up a lot. And that's 20% decline. So they didn't exactly say those ratios, but that in my mind, I'm thinking what they're doing. It's like a 2 to 1, some sort of ratio where they're selling one and then buying more further out of the money to really profit. And it just offsets the cost, because obviously closer to the money, if you sell those are more than the ones further out of the money. So sell one close to the money and then sell one further, or sell more further out.
Okay, but like I guess the reason I thought the fund had such a high return was that not that you had these massive gains when the market would crash, but that because you could put, instead of only putting 60% of your money into like the S&P, you could put close to 95 to 97%, and then you would just protect it with the 3% insurance. So instead of getting like only the gains from the market, that would be 60%, you would get close to 95% of your money would be in that. And then if you had a downturn, you're protected by the essentially the insurance fund.
That's, and then I think at least recently, the 60-40 stock bond split has not done well, because during COVID, interest rates have been going up. So stocks have been going, or bonds have been going down, and the stock market was going. So I think historically, I think it was like one of the worst years for that 60-40 split these last couple of years. So I kind of wonder, and one of the questions, like, because they talk like some of these big time hedge fund operators, they say, they're quote unquote, some of them are fooled by randomness. They just happen to survive some of the crazy things they've done. And I somewhat wonder, is like Taleb and Spitznagel somewhat fooled by randomness too? Because sometimes they were saying things like you couldn't, like, and at least in Taleb's words, it sounds like he's saying you can't really identify when a black swans is coming, but they were on the other hand saying they're buying cheap puts. So how did they know they're cheap? I guess that was the question I was getting to, or like asking myself, because it sounded like other operators were saying like you could identify ripples in the system and like see it coming. But from at least how Taleb talks, it sounds like he doesn't really think you can really forecast them. But then it's kind of like, well, are you fooled by randomness because you think they're cheap? And I was kind of going back and forth because that kind of seemed like a contradiction to me.
Okay, so the person you're talking about is that French physicist D.A. Sournay.
Yeah, I forgot his name, but yeah, that's
so
right.
did you? And so his like terminology was he referred to what you're referring to as a dragon king. Did you? Patterson talks about it in the book, but did you watch the debate between the two of them?
No, how was that? And who like mediated it or moderated it?
I honestly don't remember. It was like 45 minutes. If you just type in Sournay versus Taleb on YouTube, it will come up.
Okay.
He made it.
Yeah, we should make a note to post to like link that.
In the book, he made it sound like the debate was somewhat contentious, but I felt like it was pretty civil. And from what I've heard Taleb say about other people before, I felt like he was relatively I felt like it was like kind of like gloves on type of debate from what I've seen. But so I mean I feel like it just was like a totally semantic thing, like because like what he was calling a dragon king, Taleb was calling a gray swan, something that could, you could like some people could identify. So like I think the 2008 housing market crash, like a lot of people identified, like not a lot, but people definitely identified that the housing market was going to crash. So I don't know. When I was reading these things and listening and reading his other books, I feel like it's somewhat semantical, but I almost feel like by definition, you cannot, by his own definition, I feel like you cannot predict a black swan. So if this is at least how I think about it in my head. So if it's something that you can predict, it's by definition not a black swan.
Okay.
But I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but this is just how I think about it. And everything else, if every other type of very rare occurrence, I think by their term, the way I've understood it, by their terminology would then be any type of rare occurrence that people are able to predict would then, I think, be a gray swan.
So like, I mean, but like, yeah, just like, do you consider COVID like a black swan?
I think I think it depends to who, like.
Right. And I think they brought up this example of like the 9/11 attacks.
Right.
Because like to the terrorists, it wasn't a black swan because like they're planning it. And it's but I just come back to the point like, and I get buying insurance. Like if you're worried about the worst case scenario, buy insurance. And I think that's a good message. And yeah, I like that. It's just when they use language like the puts are cheap, I like that implies there's some sort of analysis behind it showing that they're tracking something, and maybe it's kind of just like in retrospect they're going back and looking to see what puts have historically sold for and how that is that really reflected in how often these quote unquote black swans are happening. It's interesting. And then there's he did address it that like how the Fed like just prints money on occasion, and that's what they refer to as like the Fed put. Like if people hear that term, like that's why some people like elect not to like diversify so much or just go all in on stocks, because they just assume the Fed will bail them out with excess like money printing. So I guess this strategy, the scenario where it would really do bad is if because it really needs like a steep decline like fast. But if the stock market were really to just like go down steadily over long periods of time, this would get like crushed. Yeah.
They acknowledge that.
Yeah, and that was an important part, I think. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I will say I do try to do part of my portfolio this way. I don't do a full 3%, but I do some in my like stock brokerage account where I'm doing similar things to this.
Okay, so you've somewhat implemented this because one of the, I mean, it all kind of somewhat of jumbled of like where I either read or heard it, but I felt like in something listening or reading Scott Patterson, I felt like he was saying like normal investors should not do this because he was making it sound like you don't have enough cash and you'll just like bleed your own money out. But so you are sort of doing it, or they just don't know what to do. Maybe he was being somewhat elitist. So you are actually buying the out of the money puts.
Yeah, and I'm doing exactly what they're doing. I'm selling a put and then buying more further out of the money. So, and I do them typically on SPY. I mean, you can do it. I mean, there's probably many others. I mean, you could do on like the NASDAQ fund, like QQQ. I mean, you could do it on any individual stock if you had a ton of exposure to one individual stock. I mean, other people view like selling covered calls, like so they'll have their shares and they'll just like sell off the upside, and that kind of offsets the risk. So there's other ways to do it, and it's just what are you willing to accept? Like, are you willing to accept a 20% decline in a month? Like, if you are, it's just don't buy them. Like, it's probably, I mean, you're probably okay. It's probably not going to go down more than that. But so if you're worried about that, then yeah, buy the insurance. It's just like anything else you're worried about in life. Like if you're worried about your house catching, on fire and burning down, like buy insurance. And that's all this is.
So
So
I
it's
guess
just, yeah, go ahead.
COVID's an interesting point because so he brought up, well, the one thing that I thought was good was that when you have these massive declines, if you have this insurance policy, you then have access to a lot more cash when the market would be at a local low.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first chapter, he says Bill Ackman, who sort of realized this when he made all that money, he then put everything back in the market and then got the market on the upswing as well. So I feel like that's probably one of the other benefits, right? Is getting
Sure.
more,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, like during COVID, just I remember thinking like I felt like people were panicking, and I just literally kept everything in my account. I didn't do anything,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, there was like over like 2 months, I think I lost like about 20%, and I felt really bad. And then it recovered. And I don't know if that's a great mentality to have, but that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so
Yeah, I
I think
remember. I remember going back up to Michigan right at the beginning of lockdown, driving around, just looking at the neighborhoods, and I just remember I kept checking my phone, and Bitcoin everything was getting crushed, and it was just so easy for me to buy Bitcoin that I just kept buying Bitcoin, and that was kind of what I was doing. But and maybe I just got lucky because I don't really have that many. Well, I did have money in my 401ks, but I don't really have a ton in like after tax brokerage accounts. Um, but yeah, it was yes. I mean, scary when people see their their numbers going down.
I mean, I guess it's different for us because I feel like we're young. So I don't know. I just sort of was like, uh, I just always remember thinking like the time to sell is when things are high, or I guess when they're crashing. I mean, at some point, obviously, that type of mentality could really hurt you if you just think like the crash is always going to stop,
Mm-hmm.
and then you sort of like what you say. I mean, if you believe that the government will then kind of try to fix things, you then have to imagine that the stock market will recover is kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, because look at like yeah, it was a little scary right during COVID. I mean, and some landlords couldn't kick out their tenants if they weren't paying rent. Some tenants lost their jobs, you know.
Yeah, that was actually
uh-huh.
that was to me a lot more scary.
Right.
Not because I literally just bought a house, I think in February of 2020. I had tenants in there, and then I don't know, I don't remember when some of those ridiculous laws were passed in Michigan, but at some point there was like a rent moratorium where you couldn't evict the people, and you couldn't evict them, and then you would just have to like sue them for the rent after the fact. And thankfully the guys I had in that house continued to make all of the payments and never really did anything.
Yeah, I had one tenant that started getting the COVID relief money, but it took like 4 months to get it. And so like, I mean, I eventually got it, but it's just all a lot of issues. But just think like the house, your estimates went up a ton during COVID. Or at least like, before and after. So,
I mean, the house that I'm referring to is the one of them. I always forget which. I usually use Realtor, but the Realtor value has doubled since 2020.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously it's relatively a cheap house, but still, that's good.
Yeah. So what's the so I guess the moral of that story is like, borrow a bunch of money and buy real stuff and with the inflation, you'll be rich.
Right. Isn't that what was it? Who's the guy who does the great talk about the characteristics of money, the Bitcoin guy?
Characteristics of money.
Gives the 5 properties of money. It's like an hour and a half speech. He does it a lot.
Is it like Saifedean?
No. He has a podcast.
Breedlove?
Breedlove, yeah. Yeah, the easiest way to get rich in America is buy cash flowing, appreciating assets and just keep buying them.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll be rich.
Yep. So, well, what do you think of the only other thing that I like took from this book was this? He brings up this precautionary principle, and let me read it for you. So it says, if an action might cause severe or irreversible harm to the public in absence of a scientific consensus, the burden of proof falls on those who would advocate taking the action.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get I get what he's saying, and I think it's a good principle to have. But so this was in reference to like global warming, right? And he was also talking about GMOs.
Yeah, he talks about GMOs a lot, actually. I didn't really know that. Yeah, global warming, GMOs, pandemics. Like if the human race is at threat and the introduction of like some, I don't know, medicine or some, I guess, like global, like some sort of, I don't know, effect from the public on heating the planet, like that could threaten the human race, you should have to prove that it's not going to harm the existence of the human race. And I don't know if he's like trying to be like the gatekeeper for all decisions. I don't know what the goal is here.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is like, well, one, an adoption problem, because if you're going to go out and argue that we as Americans shouldn't burn fossil fuel, you have to get the rest of the world to do it as well. GMO things, I actually, in some regards, I get where he's coming from, but I also heard him make an argument once for I think it was something that increased the longevity of the like the stock, like the whatever they were organizing. I think it was corn.
Hmm.
And he sort of said, like, instead of like, why are we modifying like the genetics of corn to increase its longevity by like 20 or 30%? And I mean, I'm definitely getting these numbers wrong, and I could be getting the commodity wrong. But instead, like, why don't we just optimize the shipping efficiency? Because like he more or less showed that like 80% of the loss of the commodity was due not to, you know, not to it going bad, but due to the fact that the shipping was so inefficient, the truckers weren't like able to get it to the required markets quick enough. So, I mean, it's like a fair, I feel like it's a fair point, and I think to some extent in that regard, he is correct. Like you're probably better off maximizing that before you start tinkering with the plants. But at the same time, like GMOs, essentially what they are, like people have bred corn today, even 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 disregarding, I don't even the GMO corn. Like corn today is vastly, vastly different than corn like 3,000 years ago. It's been bred by humans for thousands of years, and
Hmm.
you're just modifying it in a different way, but you're still modifying it. So I
Hmm.
think he's probably correct that you're not going to create some. I can't imagine how you could have some massive catastrophe by just breeding plants in different ways. While I could envision someone really screwing something up in a lab and causing some type of catastrophe that way.
Hmm.
Uh, and actually, I remember one of my my plant chemistry professor, he essentially said the same thing. He said it's only a matter of time before someone making a GMO vegetable or fruit really messes something up. People have problems, and it's essentially outlawed. Uh,
Hmm.
so in that
Interesting.
regard, I don't really know if that would be a black swan, but the climate change, the global warming stuff, yet again, I get where he's coming from, but I think it's a good philosophy to have, but I just don't think in practice it's practical.
Yeah, because I don't really know what they're proposing on that front. Like, do they want everyone to just live in huts? Like, do we not want to fly in airplanes anymore? Like, do you want to paddle across the Atlantic Ocean? Like, I don't know what's the plan?
Right, right. Yeah, it's like what I don't know. I mean, normally, like I feel like someone after making that argument would go into making a like, a green energy argument. But I mean, most of a lot of the things that I've heard is like the best thing to do is just make all these, just get every country in the world up to like a first world status. So the technology they're using is cleaner, their emissions go down, uh, and they become sort of more industrialized.
Hmm.
But because like the worst stuff is like burning wood and coal. I mean, we obviously still burn a lot of coal as well, but like you can get, I think natural gas is pretty clean.
So, like, why is
But
why is burning wood so bad?
I don't know. I just know
Yeah.
it's dirty.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when we were driving around Montenegro, they were burning like their trash like under the open sky. And that was like one of the first times I think it was the first time I've like seen something like that. I don't remember seeing anything like that in Brazil when we were there.
But you
Um,
do remember seeing the like favelas.
I do remember seeing that. Yes, I will never forget. Yes, driving and then like stopping at the red light and then the one guy shouting "Don't stop" or something.
The
Um,
motorcycle like pounding on the window, like
yeah,
getting upset at us, and
yeah, yeah.
or like I don't think I'll ever forget looking at the Flavella that just had like one room just had, or one house just had three walls. It was
Mhm.
like an open apartment almost with no roof. And I'm like, what is the point of this?
Yeah.
At least put a tarp on it or something.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to lose one wall in a house, the one that I'm probably least likely to want to lose is probably the roof.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So like,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I don't know. Also, I was thinking like from a so he generalizes it uh to the entire world, right?
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
precautionary tale. I mean, did you think about like what it would be like if you took this precaution to like your own individual self?
Sure. Absolutely. That's kind of how what I was thinking of because I think it goes to I think in certain insurances like just to cut or eliminate certain risks, and then I also like in term well at least in money terms I think it kind of talks about, I think it gets to the point of it's important not to get knocked out of the game. And I think this is one thing, like, I think Warren Buffett talks about, like, you just want to, like, it's not about like the return on money, it's like return of your money, like, just making sure you keep getting your principal back. Because, like, if you go down 20%, well, you now need a 25% return just to get back to even, and just eliminating those times where you're taking those losses. You can, and this is kind of why I like some, I mean, we've talked about the whole life policies, how you just have this like uninterrupted compound interest that this new asset that you can borrow from. Yeah, it's maybe not as flashy as some of these other things, but I mean, you can borrow from it and it's a more stable asset. And I think it just gets to that point that you just gotta focus on not getting knocked out of the game. Like, don't do crazy stuff with leverage and um, just yeah, avoid ruin. Like, essentially, I don't know how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like avoid ruin because I feel like whenever I think about it's like if you can just get through if you're in like a tight uh financial position, if you can essentially just push through it. I mean, everyone's situation is different, but if you're in, like, if you can just push through it, you can then probably recover. So just avoiding those is probably the most important thing. And like what you said, Warren Buffett's rules of investing, rule one is don't lose your principal, and rule two is don't forget rule one.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, yeah. So obviously, like what you said is true. Like the most important thing is like not losing your principal, because then a lot of times when people lose it, the first thing they think is like, oh, I gotta go bigger now,
Yep.
to get it back. And then you start
Mhm.
doing wilder and crazier stuff, and then you lose. I feel like there's a lot of times a big snowball effect where people will lose some money, and instead of just getting out, they'll try and almost pile in to try and make more.
Yeah. Double down.
And that's functionally how the book starts when Spitznagel was talking about his time as a trader on at Chicago. His like mantra was like love to lose, and whenever he had a small losing position, he would immediately just sell out of it, and
Yeah.
that's what enabled him to get through. Was it that '87 crash or I don't know if he was in some big crash, but I don't think that was where Taleb made all of his money originally.
Yeah, this is one thing I really admire about traders is just like that short memory and trying to check your ego at the door and just oh yeah, avoid ruin. Like they are if they're like the premise changes, just cut the trade, go on to the next trade, live to see another day, and don't start chasing a losing trade. I'm actually, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of going through this with well, not really a losing trade, but like one of my Michigan houses, like I'm trying to like think I'm gonna sell it, and I just because I feel like the trade has ended kind of. Like I don't think there's a lot of room for the rents. I'd have to dump a ton of money in to get them up to market rents, and then I'd have vacancies to deal with. So like, and I thought I would be able to raise some of the rents, and now I'm just yeah. So I think I'm getting to the point where I just need to cut it. But yeah, that's one of the things I really admire about some of these traders. It's almost like they're machines. It's kind of funny because like the trader, I feel like human traders are trying to operate more like machines, but then we got like this AI stuff that's trying to like be more human. It's like kind of like weird to think about. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, Jack, do you have any final thoughts on the book?
um, I liked it. I think I'm gonna go check to see if I've actually read Fooled by Randomness. Um,
I
just
think
with how I
you've
think
read Anti-Fragile, haven't you?
that's true. I have read that one. I've read Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, and I think I read Skin in the Game, but I don't think I've read Fooled by Randomness.
I think you did skin the game by
Yeah,
yourself in this.
maybe. Yeah. I mean they're definitely entertaining books. Um, so what about you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the book. Sort of. I mean, I guess it's good that I feel like you're sort of doing what they offered. I felt like at times when I was reading this and then I was listening and they were sort of saying like, normal investors like shouldn't do this or couldn't do this. Like I kind of was like, okay, well, what's the point of this book then? Like if I mean, most of the people reading this aren't like managing like billion-dollar hedge funds. Just if that's truly your position, just write a memo and send it to them. Like, why do you need to write a book and tell everyone? But
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, I liked it. Thought it was good. It's always good just hearing about this stuff, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so with that, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating in whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I am Jack Allweil, and with me, as always, is my brother Alex Allweil. And Al, what are we reading next time?
Well, the next book we were doing is he's a very interesting man.
Wait, Al, can you
He's a
go back?
Lebanese.
Al, can you go back like I don't know if it was my internet or yours, but like right after I asked what book we're reading, like you cut out.
We were doing The Parasitic Mind by His Godliness the God Saad, he's a very interesting man. He's a biologist up in Canada, but he's a Lebanese Jew. Uh, he's a good listen to. He runs a podcast as well. It's good to
Okay,
listen to.
awesome,
But yeah.
awesome. Well, until next time.
All righty. Later, Jack.